Right now, some U.S. manufacturers say they're being hurt by the tariffs, and their customers will feel the pain.
It's been around a 36% drop in volume since April in terms of outbound shipments from Australia to the US.
It's a tariff on parents, and it's a tariff on small and medium businesses throughout the entire country.
It happened in silence, but the impact was deafening. One signature in Ottawa sent tremors through Washington, shaking the foundations of North America's economic order. For decades, the continent was seen as the most secure trade fortress in the world. Now that fortress is cracking, and the collapse is starting at America's doorstep, Canada has done the unthinkable. 11 new trade agreements signed in rapid succession, drawing in every major partner from Tokyo to London. And the United States, left outside the room, watching its closest ally redraw the global map without it. This is not just a diplomatic snub. It's betrayal backed by numbers. The United States once commanded $780 billion in annual trade with Canada, more than its combined trade with China, Mexico, and the entire European Union. Now that lifeline is unraveling. 7 American industries, retail, autos, agriculture, energy, data, manufacturing, and finance, are being forced to their knees. The message from Ottawa is unmistakable. The world can move on without Washington. And that raises a chilling question. If America's own neighbor no longer trusts a partnership, how long before others follow? The rupture shows up most immediately on Canadian store shelves. For decades, American brands dominated every aisle, from electronics to groceries. But that dominance is eroding at breathtaking speed. One of America's largest retail corporations has already watched its Canadian market share collapse by 23%, with $847 million in revenue hanging by a thread. Wall Street reacted in real time. The company's stock price plunged 8% within hours of Canada's announcement. This shift isn't symbolic, it's physical. Canadian retailers are replacing U.S. products with South Korean electronics, Japanese appliances, and Australian food staples. Goods that once bore the stamp "Made in America" are vanishing, replaced by foreign alternatives that arrive tariff-free and on schedule. The consequences cross the border instantly. Distribution hubs in Michigan and New York are bracing for layoffs, preparing to cut thousands of jobs as truckloads of American goods are canceled before they even leave the lot. For families in those border towns, this isn't a policy dispute. It's a pink slip that if retail is the first crack, the auto industry is a deeper fracture. What happens on store shelves is visible in weeks. What happens on the roads defines decades. Streets once lined with American-made cars are now shifting toward Asian alternatives, and that transformation is accelerating. U.S. auto parts worth $1.2 billion in annual Canadian sales are being squeezed out by foreign competition. South Korean brake systems, armed with a 15% tariff advantage, are undercutting U.S. suppliers at every level. What seemed like a narrow pricing edge has become a systemic threat, driving Canadian buyers away from American components. Even Detroit's own titans are no longer loyal to home soil. Ford has moved assembly of its Super Duty trucks to Ontario, lured by a $590 million incentive package that Washington couldn't match. General Motors has tied its future to Quebec's expanding battery and parts supply chain, embedding Canadian production into the heart of North American manufacturing. The picture is unmistakable. The U.S. auto industry is no longer competing from a position of dominance. It is relocating, adapting, and in many cases, surrendering ground to Canada and Asia. America's most iconic industry is being reshaped from within. The blow to autos is severe, but agriculture cuts even deeper. This time, it isn't just industry at stake. It's livelihoods. Across the Midwest, from North Dakota to Minnesota to Montana, farmers are watching fields turn from assets into liabilities. For decades, the United States controlled nearly one-third of Canada's $2.3 billion in agricultural imports. That grip is slipping fast. Australian wheat priced 12% lower is flooding Canadian mills. Brazilian soybeans, cleared faster and with fewer restrictions, are displacing U.S. shipments at Canadian ports. The consequences are immediate. In states where 40 to 60% of farm income depends on Canadian buyers, commodity prices are collapsing. Wheat silos sit half-filled. Soybean contracts are canceled mid-season. Livestock producers scramble to replace feed once supplied by U.S. corn. For many farming families, the math no longer adds up. Costs keep rising while their most dependable customer disappears. The symbolism is as brutal as the numbers. America's breadbasket, long considered unshakable, is being undercut in its own backyard. And unlike tariffs or subsidies, there is no quick fix for a market that has already found cheaper, more reliable suppliers. If agriculture reveals America's vulnerability on the ground, energy and data expose its fragility at the core. These are the lifelines of a modern superpower, and both are slipping away. In less than 2 years, one of the United States' largest energy firms has seen access to Canadian crude shrink by 34%. Refinery output has plunged to just 67% of capacity, leaving once bustling plants running below half speed. Tankers that once crossed the border daily now sit idle. Long-term supply contracts are quietly being rerouted. Investors have noticed. Shares in the company are down 15%. Reflecting not just short-term losses but the evaporation of long-term confidence in America's energy security. But the deeper rupture may not be oil, it's information. A leading U.S. tech corporation has reported a 28% collapse in data flow from Canada, a shortfall valued at $1.8 billion in lost revenue. Ottawa's decision to build a trans-Pacific data cable that bypasses the United States entirely is more than an engineering project. It's a declaration of independence from American infrastructure. For the first time, Canadian data will flow to Asia and beyond without touching U.S. soil, stripping Washington of a leverage point it has relied on for decades. For generations, pipelines and fiber optic cables place America at the center of energy and information flows, granting it quiet dominance over markets, politics, and even security alliances. Now those networks are being redrawn. Canada is carving out autonomy in the very arteries that once defined American power. In the 21st century, supremacy is measured not just in barrels but in bytes, and both are slipping away. If energy and data are arteries, manufacturing and finance are the spine of the U.S. economy. Yet even these pillars, once unshakable, are bending under Canada's pivot. One of America's largest manufacturing corporations, worth $2.7 billion in Canadian sales, has been forced to relocate assembly operations across the border. The reason is survival. Only by moving into Canada can it gain access to Pacific trade routes now closed to Washington. The cost is unmistakable. American jobs traded away for foreign market entry. For towns that relied on these plants, the decision is devastating. Machinery is packed up, contract rewritten, and Canadian labor takes over. At the same time, a new alliance between German and Swiss technology firms has chosen Canada as its partner, deliberately excluding U.S. companies from the value chain. What was once a transatlantic axis with Washington at its center is now shifting north, eroding America's claim to be the indispensable hub of advanced industry. For U.S. suppliers, it means standing on the sidelines as billion-dollar deals in next-generation technology move forward. Without them, finance tells the same story. A U.S. giant handling $4.1 billion in Canadian transactions has seen foreign exchange volumes fall 19%, triggering a 12% drop in its stock price. Canadian pension funds and institutional investors, once reliable sources of Wall Street liquidity, are now funneling billions into Australian retirement systems, European equities, and Asian capital markets. The outflow is more than financial. It represents a psychological break, a decision by Canadian investors that U.S. markets are no longer the safest bet. The ripple effect is profound. As capital drains and manufacturing shifts abroad, Washington loses not only revenue but influence. Market leadership is no longer assumed. America finds itself competing for investment it once took for granted. In both factories and finance, the foundation is eroding, and the cracks are widening faster than anyone expected. These losses are not confined to boardrooms or stock tickers. They spill into entire communities, turning economic strategy into human crisis. The numbers are precise: $11.2 billion in direct losses. When the shock waves ripple through supply chains, the total impact nears $26.9 billion. Behind those figures are livelihoods. Hundreds of thousands of jobs in construction, transport, warehousing, and manufacturing now hang in the balance. Every cancelled shipment or shuttered plant means another paycheck disappears. Another household pushed into uncertainty. The corporate withdrawals only deepen the wound. Coca-Cola, Campbell, and Heinz have already shifted production lines to Ontario, sidestepping U.S. tariffs on aluminum and escaping labor costs that no longer make sense south of the border. For workers, this isn't just factory relocation. It's the hollowing out of entire communities built around those assembly lines. Border towns feel it first. In places where up to 60% of revenue depends on Canadian trade, once thriving streets are falling silent. Storefronts empty. Logistics hubs sit half-used. Entire towns face the risk of economic obsolescence. For these communities, the U.S.-Canada split isn't an abstract debate. It's the sudden disappearance of the future they were promised, and the effects radiate outward. Schools tied to local tax revenue cut programs. Hospitals in rural areas, long dependent on stable employment in manufacturing and transport, confront budget shortfalls. Even small businesses, from diners serving truck drivers to suppliers of industrial parts, are caught in the chain reaction. The decline is not contained. It cascades, reshaping every layer of local life. What began as a trade dispute has mutated into something far greater, a reordering of the Western economic system. Canada's pivot is not an isolated maneuver. It's a precedent. It signals to Mexico, to Europe, and to every U.S. ally that dependence on Washington is no longer inevitable. The consequences stretch far beyond commerce. NATO and NORAD, once underpinned by economic unity, now face the risk of fracture as North America drifts apart. This silent restructuring is stripping the United States of its central role, reducing it from the anchor of the Western system to just another link in the chain. And the danger is not temporary. America stands on the brink of losing its leadership position in the global economy, a strategic loss that may prove irreversible. When allies find new partners, when supply chains reroute, when capital relocates, history rarely flows backward. The question now is stark. If America can lose its dominance in North America, how long before its global leadership follows?